Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be part of this conference. I will indeed talk a little bit more about the context of this energy transition, and I put that under quotes because this energy transition is understood differently in different parts of the world, and sometimes even in different parts of a single country. And just to put this context and to put back some figures also on what energy means for that. And I will be happy to discuss this with all of you afterwards. Background also in terms of time. Energy has always been very important, but it has become overly important for the whole society since the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution happened. And the Industrial Revolution happened because there was a cheap and accessible energy source, which was coal at the time in the United Kingdom. And then the 20th century has seen the transportation revolution, which has made the world smaller. And you can now fly back and forth in the world or drive back and forth in your country because the energy density of hydrocarbons is so high that it has allowed this, this complete revolution, which has changed also the cities in which we live, the landscape and everything. And more electricity is becoming an energy vector which becomes more and more important. It has driven the telecommunications revolution. All of what we are doing right now, or what we have been doing during the coronavirus crisis, wouldn't have been possible without electricity. In fact, electricity, even more than hydrocarbons, has permeated every aspect of daily life. Just think how to run an hospital without electricity. That would be simply impossible to go back. And then the question is, how do we produce that electricity? And so what will be the driving energy vector of the 21st century? And there are some indications that for the moment, we are back to coal. And we'll see how and probably the energy transition would like also to bring answer to that, some kind of a paradox of history. So here you have, don't look into the details. You will have time to look at it. These are EIA data, which are completely accessible. I've chosen data which is always accessible. Essentially, we consume 2 times more energy than we did when I was born in 1973. And you see that, in fact, the share of oil has gone back, whereas the share of 2 other fossil energies, namely coal and natural gas, has gone up. The combined share of hydro and nuclear, so 2 technologies which do not directly emit CO2, has gone down, has gone up also to 7.3%. Sorry, just a minute. Sorry, COVID has changed my life in the sense that I never know who enters the room. I'm sorry for that. And so this is the share of energy, and we see this increase in particular in the share of oil. This is the consumption with respect to the regions of the world. You always see this factor of 2 in the consumption, and you see this big increase of non-OECD countries. In fact, our countries, industrialized countries, become less and less important. Our aim is to decrease our energy consumption, and we become less important with respect to this energy transition. And you see that even if you take away China, of course, this consumption goes up in many countries. Just think about the Middle East. Until 20 years ago, we thought about the Middle East as our energy reserve. And now these people, also with the prosperity that they've achieved because of fossil energy, now becoming big consumers of energy. So the landscape is changing from that point of view. And here, an old picture, but which I like a lot, where you see that in fact, so-called industrialized countries, they're expected not to increase their energy consumption or even to go back in their energy consumption, whereas so-called developing countries, sorry for this shortcut, I don't like that term, but that's the way to call them, like countries in Africa or in South America, are expected to increase their consumption. And so this means that in this energy transition, the idea is not that these countries will consume less energy, but that in fact they can consume more energy for their needs to increase the quality of life, but without catastrophic environmental impact. And this is where it is important to collaborate and to really have a holistic vision. Because just in the diagram below, I just remind that there are more than 1 billion people without access to electricity. So these are not people that you can go to and say, please use an economy bulb. They don't have the bulb, they don't have the grid, or they only have it for 1 hour a day. So the energy transition, how to explain it, how to introduce it will be different, of course, in these countries than in industrialized countries. Then electricity. In fact, where you see we consume 4 times more electricity than we did in '73. So the world becomes more electric. This is clear. And the fossil energy's total share decreased to produce that electricity. The power generation without direct CO2 emissions increases a little bit, sustained in particular also in these last years by huge penetration of renewable energy sources or new renewables, since hydro was already there before. But in fact, if you look at that graph, you see that the piece of the pie of coal has not changed. So this means, ladies and gentlemen, that unfortunately, for the moment being, we burn 4 times more coal than in '73 to generate electricity. So these are has lots of consequences in terms of what we do with that electricity. Think about heat pumps, think about electric vehicles. We have to think how the electricity is produced and what would be the best choice. So it's not a pessimistic view, it's just to keep that in mind, that we still have this 40% of coal, also in some European countries, for the generation of electricity. Going back to Switzerland, Switzerland, in fact, electricity is a part of the pie, is essentially 1/4 of the pie. So the challenge, we talk a lot about electricity in Switzerland as if the energy transition was a transition only on electricity, most of the times concentrating only on nuclear, but in fact, it's only 1/4. The challenge of Switzerland is mainly in the heating, because we are a cold country, and in the mobility sector, because we are a prosperous country. And this is something that both my colleagues Sandra and Christian will tell you about later. Also, another thing which is happening in Switzerland, you see how the electricity was produced month by month in 2000 and how it was consumed. This is a black line. And you see in 2017, and you see that there is a gap which is created. So in winter, Switzerland, which was before a self-reliant country, although exchanging with the neighbors, but self-reliant country in terms of electricity, is becoming now an importing country. So 2018 was slightly better because the winter was a bit milder, but the general trend for our country is that we miss electricity production generation in winter. There is a winter gap, which has many, many reasons that we can discuss before, but we are losing autosufficiency, and it means that we need also to import heavily carbon generated electricity. And this is something we have to keep in mind. Buildings refurbishment, my colleague Sandra will tell more about that. Here you have just a few numbers. In fact, we don't refurbish a lot in Switzerland. Here you see just an illustration of how much it is refurbished in terms of windows, of facades, and other parts of the houses. And you see that most of the refurbishment are non-energy related. And this is not changing. Of course, this is also due to the fact that prices are particularly high in Switzerland, but there are also other mechanisms in line. And Sandra will tell you of one possible solution, which would be to have energy performance contracting, which would particularly make sense in a country like Switzerland, where 80% of the people rent the place where they are living and not own it, contrary to others. And just if you have a look here at the number, we invest 13 billions of Swiss franc in what so-called Umbau in German, so in the renovation, and the present federal contribution or subsidies to help that is less than half a billion, sorry. So you see that also these numbers tell us a little bit of this difficulty to increase the refurbishment rate, which is critical because we are a cold country and we need to heat our houses lots of months every year. This is something I like. I think that the cities and the urban zones of the future will be multi-energy. That means that there will be an interaction of natural gas network, electricity network, and heating and cooling networks, and making the best of these networks where it is needed. And not to think about the energy vector that you are buying, but of the energy service that you need. And this can be brought by natural gas, in the future renewable gas, or by the electricity grid. And really making these grids work together, I think this will be particularly important. So technologies like based on hydrogen or on cogeneration will be particularly important. And my colleague Christian will be very interesting to hear that in fact, it's not only the network's convergence, but it's also a convergence of the sectors. This means that an energy vector which may not be used for heating could be used for mobility or could be stored for another season of the year. So this is a very complex system that will be put in place, where in fact we'll talk about energy services, mobility services, and not really thinking anymore about which energy vector brings that, as long as it is sustainable and it comes at a reasonable price. But more to that in the presentation of Christian. I'm a big believer, and I will slowly stop with that, in cogeneration. So cogeneration, these are units which in fact in houses or in industries or in neighborhoods can produce both power and heat at the same time. So it makes perfect sense for Switzerland, which is a cold country that needs electricity and heat at the same time. So in fact, it could help us decrease the winter power deficit, especially now that the people have democratically decided to step out of generation 3 nuclear. It will help us to not to overinvest in distribution grids that we will have to refurbish, because there will be so much more happening on the electricity grid. And in fact, the natural gas networks already exist, and all of us as taxpayers have paid for them. And these natural gas networks could still be useful, in fact. And although they will probably bring more and more, less and less fossil methane and more renewable methane in the future. So I think that cogeneration, especially in Switzerland, as a cold country and as a country which has stepped out of generation 3 nuclear, will be particularly important. But if you look at what is happening from a regulatory or a policy framework, it's a complete wilderness. Everybody's talking about generation. I have slides of our previous minister saying that cogeneration is a good thing, but not much has happened in that sector. It's not her fault. That's not what I'm saying. But there's a lot of talk, and this is typically a subject that does not move forward. Maybe we can discuss this afterwards. Why maybe cogeneration is going forward in many countries. One of them is Germany. The other one is the UK. Other ones are South Korea or Japan, also with fuel cells, also with hydrogen. And in our country, it doesn't move a lot. And the last thing I wanted to say, and I will stop with that, is that, of course, everybody's expecting this new CO2 law that will come. So the CO2 law had been stopped 2 years ago by the federal parliament. The federal parliament has been changed, and now this is coming back on the table. We have seen lots of articles concentrating a lot, of course, on the price of the plane tickets, but there are many, many other things in this CO2 law, and it will have a huge importance for the energy transition in Switzerland. In fact, the experts tell you that it will have more importance than the law on energy, because everything will be driven by what Switzerland has agreed upon in the Paris Agreement. But I just wanted to show you this equation, which tells you that CO2 is not the whole thing. In fact, the CO2, you could, in fact, by the usual mathematical trick to multiply by 1 and divide by 1, you could say that the total CO2 emissions are, in fact, CO2 emissions per energy, per unit of energy. And in fact, this is related to how many fossil energies you use. But then it's not all of that. And the law will only concentrate essentially on that. Then you have the efficiency. So how much energy you use per square meter. And then how many square meter you have per person that lives in a given country. And here you get out, and that's why it's blue, it's not green, it's not orange anymore. This is not technical anymore. These are social decisions. How many square meters should a family have, or is a family comfortable about just to live? And how many persons do I want in cities? Do I want to increase density? This is purely non-technological kind of decisions. And then also which kind of increase of population I would like to have. Of course, in democratic countries, this is not something that the government decides about, but this is also part of the debate. It has been a debate in Switzerland 3 years ago with a law who wanted to, in fact, decrease that part of the equation. So CO2 is not only a technological thing, it's not only fossil or non-fossil, because in fact you could have, like cogeneration, a part of fossil, but which could increase the energy efficiency in such a way that it decreases, in fact, the CO2 emissions. It's about efficiency. So these are investments and technologies, and so purely social and political kind of decisions, which are outside of the technology field. So I hope this has put some fodder for discussion afterwards. This is in no way something which is conclusive, thorough, or comprehensive. This was more of a fodder for all our discussions that we will have until 7 p.m. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for your input.